I'll ask you a tough one here. Did you recommend Andy Weidl?
Oh yeah, Andy. Andy was actually our first intern when I got into Pittsburgh. He had worked for Tom Donahoe as the Steeler intern.
I mean, I'm going to ask Kevin Colbert here in a second, but it had to be Chuck. No, I don't know who the GM was with Chuck. It had to be the Rooneys. That 74 draft is legendary. Then they had the legendary Neil Donahoe who was in there. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Kevin took over for him. And I'm just wondering how many GMs that they've had since 1969. A man who called his final draft and has built one of the great scouting departments in all of the National Football League is my friend Kevin Colbert. And he joins us right now here on the National Football Show. Kevin, was there somebody between you and Neil?
Are you talking about Tom Donahoe?
Tom Donahoe.
Yes, Tom was, I succeeded Tom here after his successful career. And then prior to that, in the 70s, I heard you referencing that. It was Art Rooney Jr. Art Rooney was the late Dan Rooney's brother, and he was one of the Chiefs' sons as well. So Art, constructed the personnel department back then, along with, he had the great Bill Nunn and Dick Haley, and Tom Modrak was part of that. And it was a great group. And obviously they did. I heard you mention that 74 draft class with 4 Hall of Famers drafted and 1 signed as a free agent. That's going to be a hard one to duplicate because that was special.
Kevin, it's amazing, though. So you're telling me there's really only been 2 general managers in Pittsburgh since 1969?
No, again, we never had the general manager role. We kind of switched that about halfway through my tenure, and the reason we did it was so I could get a better seat in the press box. The director of football operations, I don't know if I operated the elevator or what, but it was there was been 3 people in that position since Coach Knoll. You had mentioned Coach Knoll and Coach Cowher and Coach Tomlin. So there's been 3 head coaches in that era as well. So I think it speaks to the stability of this organization. I think is pretty unique in pro sports.
What's it been like being the Steeler general manager and constructing a football team for both Coach Cowher and for Coach Tomlin? I mean, it's got to be one of the crowning achievement jobs that anybody can land, being the general manager or head of personnel there in Pittsburgh.
You know what, Dan? It's been, having grown up, 5 minutes from the stadium, it was a little surreal for the most part. When you're working with the greats like Bill Nunn and Coach Tomlin and Coach Cowher, but even having Joe Green as part of our staff for 9 years after Joe got out of coaching, you never took it for granted. But boy, you look back on it now and say, wait, I was surrounded by some great folks. I mean, in a given scouting meeting, we would have had Bill Nunn, we would have had Coach LeBeau, we would have had Russ Grimm, we could have had Joe Green, and Mr. Rooney popping his head in. And by the way, we might have been talking about Troy Polamalu. So sometimes when you're involved in it, I know you don't get a chance to think about it, but later on, maybe we'll reflect on how fortunate we've been.
Kevin, who's the biggest influence in your life? You've worked also with Ron Hughes, who I just have nothing but the greatest respect for, and I love the man too. I mean, there's been so many people in your life, in your career. Who has been, or has it been a collection of men?
It's been a collection along the way, men and women. We all have great women behind us as well, and my wife Janice has been a huge part of that. But you mentioned Ron, and Ron was my high school coach, and one of the best things, he gave me my start in scouting because after he watched me play, he said, "Hey, you might be better off sitting on the side watching." But Ron got me into the high school coaching world and continue to follow him into the pro scouting world. But there's been great guys I've been able to touch base with. I had some brothers that worked in football. You mentioned Bill Nunn, Art Rooney Jr., there's been so many, Dan. It's hard, but if I was to pick one person outside of a family member, it was certainly Ronnie because, again, he gave me a chance as a high school player, and then when I moved into college, I was a baseball player because Robert Morris didn't have football, and thank God they didn't because I was a better baseball player than football. But Ron got me started in the scouting world, coming out of. Actually, when I was at the Community College of Allegheny County. So Ron was big, and, unfortunately he passed away, but he continued to influence me up until the point he passed.
Kevin, is this it? Is it a respite for you? Will you be involved with the organization still? What's next for Kevin Colbert? Are you still trying to unravel that?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we've left the book, we've left the door open. Myself, Art Rooney, and then Coach Tomlin. When I decided to step aside, we did it with the understanding that maybe I could have a role. But the one thing I don't want to do, Dan, is interfere with whoever is next. If there's a way that I can help and not hinder, then maybe. We're just going to leave it open and let them make that decision on who's next. And like I said, if there's a spot and a positive way to contribute, great. If not, it might be time just to move on into whatever the next phase of life is.
Are you going to be involved in the process of finding your replacement?
I was up until, we interviewed 16 folks, and, Art hadn't done that for the last 22 years. So I had a better handle on who he should talk to than he did. And he respected that, and he interviewed the folks that I had recommended. He'll pare that down, and then he'll conduct the interviews from this point forward, along with Coach Tomlin, because, again, I wouldn't, if I don't have a permanent role, I don't think I should be involved in that decision. And we all agree on that.
I'll ask you a tough one here. Did you recommend Andy Weidl?
Oh, yeah. Andy was actually our first intern when I got into Pittsburgh. He had worked for Tom Donahoe as the Steeler intern, and he was only with us for a week because the internships end after 2 years, and he had just finished. He was coming to the end of his second year, so I've known Andy forever.
He's done a really nice job helping Howie Roseman with the Eagles over the last 2 years. They've really landed on some really good picks. We kind of covered the Eagles a little bit here now, and with a recommendation like yourself here, he seems to have a really good keen eye for talent.
He does, and all the guys that we interviewed, they had a background in pro scouting and college scouting, and if they weren't with the Steelers, I just tried to give them ideas about who the right folks might be, and that was the criteria we looked for, and Andy certainly fit that role.
Let me get into the modern draft on what you just did. And I heard this line, and I thought about it for a minute, and I said, really, maybe there is something to it. Have the Steelers always shied away usually from the Pitt kids? Because, again, Marino was in the back room there. He's right there. You guys watched him on a daily basis. He didn't have the greatest senior year. I think people always miss that. He threw for like 19 interceptions his senior year, and he didn't really play all that hot that year. They went 9-3. Previous years, they were 11-1. So you kind of got that a little bit. But there hasn't been a real focus on the Steelers. Is that because you didn't want to have pressure on the local kids, or was it just the way the cards fell?
I think it's a little bit of both. When we interview the local guys, we talk about going from being a Pitt Panther to being a Pittsburgh Steeler. You're still in the Pittsburgh market, but your demographic changes. All due respect, it changes. It's more focused on a championship of a Super Bowl caliber. Not that Pitt doesn't focus on that ACC and national championship each and every year, but it's just a difference from college to pro, and they understand that. The thing we talk about all the time is maybe we're too critical because when these young players come in next door, we watch them grow from the freshman year through whenever they decide to enter the league, and part of that growth is you see them when they weren't so good. And sometimes we say, the other young men that we scout, we watch them usually in their last 1 year or their last 2 years sometimes, and we don't see them as freshmen, so we're not as is hard to convince. You know, Kenny Pickett, we watched grow from an incoming freshman to a sophomore that was just getting his feet wet into a Heisman Trophy candidate who helped them win the ACC. So there was comfort in that, but again, sometimes we overanalyze.
Yeah, you're kind of too close to it a little bit. And now, from what I understand, you guys are like in the same building. I mean, it's like 4 steps to the left where he goes, like the Pitt facilities here, the Steeler facilities here. I mean, that's kind of a wild thing. What sold you on him, though? Was it what you just said, that you saw this leap, like from where he was here, and you saw the leap here, and then you see what potentially could be even more here? And I got to tell you, Kev, what you've done is here, you've left a parting gift the same way Ozzie Newsome left a parting gift in Baltimore for Lamar Jackson. This is kind of almost the same kind of thing. What sold you on him at the end?
You know, Kenny, I mean, he had a good senior season, right? But then that super senior season when he could come back and really take that next step in Coach Whipple's offense, a pro schematic, that it's a little easier to identify that quarterback coming out of a pro schematic than it may be a non-traditional pro schematic. Not to say those young men can't be NFL quarterbacks. It just may take them a little bit longer. So watching Kenny develop, and again, he was a prospect as a senior, but as a super senior, he took that next step, and it was almost like he had his rookie season at the University of Pittsburgh, and he grew, and we were very comfortable. You know, I don't agree with some of the criticism of that quarterback class from last year. I think it's a good quarterback class, and I'm pretty confident there's going to be several starters coming out of that group. But obviously, when we took Kenny where we did above everybody, we valued him the most. And then, again, not taking anything away from those other young men, we just thought Kenny was the best.
You know, it's funny. People, they're always like, well, this quarterback class sucks. You know, I went back, I go, yeah, people said that about the 79 class, and Montana and Sims came out of that. And there's 6 Super Bowls between those 2 guys that came out of that quarterback class. You just never know, right, Kevin, until you get an opportunity to get these guys in a uniform. Let me ask you a couple last questions here. Are the Steelers in transition? What would you classify, and how would you classify? And by the way, 17 consecutive years or whatever it is, 14 years with Mike Tomlin, never a losing season. I mean, it's remarkable, the run that he, Ben, you, and everyone has been on. I think it's 17 years. It's incredible. How do you see this roster? O-line needs some work a little bit. You guys have addressed it. You ran the ball effectively a little more with Najee last year. Quarterback's obviously going to be a question mark. Your defense has to get upgraded. I kind of threw it out there to you. Do you see yourself in transition, or do the Steelers just get next guy up and let's roll it?
Yeah, I think it's everything that you mentioned. I mean, obviously we are in transition because, our Hall of Fame quarterback decided to move on and retire. So that leaves a void. As you mentioned, we've added some folks, Kenny, Mitch Trubisky. We still have Mason, and we added a young man in the 7th round, Chris Oladokun. So we got 4 young quarterbacks that I'm confident one of them will come out and be a starter and a winning starter. Now, can they be Hall of Fame caliber people? Nobody knows at this point. The offensive line is young. We got a lot of mix and match capabilities of center guards, types, and coach will figure that out. Obviously, our running back is going into his 2nd year. Our tight end's going into his 2nd year. And we got a young group of receivers that we think are pretty talented. The defense has to come together a little bit more than they did last year. I think a healthy Devin Bush will be a different Devin Bush. You get Minka back. Terrell Edmonds is coming back. So we feel good about that group coming together. We added, we got Spoon, Akilla Witherspoon to stick around, and, we added Levi Wallace from the outside. So we need growth there. We need growth on all sides of it, but there's no doubt that it's a transitional team right now.
Man, what is it with you guys when it comes to wideouts? You find these guys everywhere, and you guys never or rarely spend first rounders. I mean, it's maybe one of the greatest records that the Steelers have had is when you find all these wideouts. What's the one intangible for you, Kev, when you're evaluating that position that you're centric on? And by the way, again, you're finding AB in the later round. You get Hines Ward in the later round. It can go on and on with this. What's the one thing that you look at when you're looking at that position?
Well, I don't think there is really one area, Dan. We've been
So
very
it's luck.
and not to take anything away from the receivers themselves, but playing with a Hall of Fame quarterback doesn't hurt. And again, there's been some really good receivers in that group. We've missed on a couple here and there, and I think it's individual. Can a guy get open? Can he create separation? Can he catch the ball? Can he run after the catch? If he can't create separation, can he make that contested catch? We had Herman Moore in Detroit. You saw that up close and personal, and Herman was a special receiver. Didn't always have great separation, but boy, he made the catch more often than not. So I think receivers come in all shapes and sizes. You try to take what they can do, and our coaches have always done a great job of making them work within what we felt we could do offensively. But what they could do helped us and helped them as well. And I can't say we have a secret sauce for it. It's just been something that we hope we hit on year in and year out.
Finally, I promise you, two last ones here. Dwayne Haskins. The one thing that I've learned about the Steeler organization, you guys take these kids in. I got this from Barrett Brooks, too. Barrett says it. Pork Chop says to say hi to you. And he's like this. When you play for the Steelers, they want you to get second and third contracts. They want you in the organization. They want to develop you. And I'm sure that the loss of Dwayne Haskins was a personal thing for all of you guys with his passing a couple weeks ago.
There's no doubt. The only thing we ever comment on Dwayne is our thoughts, our prayers are with Calabria. They're with his family, and they will continue to be. Dwayne will always be a part of us. And unfortunately, he won't be here, physically, but emotionally, he will always. Dwayne touched so many people with who he was in the short time he was there. There's nobody that didn't have a smile on their face after seeing Dwayne at whatever part of the day it was. His habit after practice was shaking my hand, shaking Coach Tomlin's hand, and shaking Mr. Rooney's hand and giving us that smile. And that's something that I know touched me, and I know touched all of our players and staff, and he'll be dearly missed.
Absolutely. Finally here. Can you do me a favor, Kev? I want you to give me a 30,000 feet evaluation on one player. Okay? On the outside, no inside anything here. Give me your perspective on where you saw Jalen Hurts a couple of years ago, being a second rounder, to the year he had, alternate Pro Bowl, got the team to the postseason. The growth, look what they did by adding A.J. Brown to the team to give him a true chance of really maybe being the guy future. What, just as an outsider looking down and looking from afar, you don't get a chance to see a lot of tape on him. I get it all. But just what you've seen a little bit so far, do you believe that guy can be a franchise quarterback?
What we always do, and I don't like to comment on other teams' folks, but in Jalen's case, and this is what we talked to Jalen about when he was coming out, the way he handled his situation in Alabama and was there for their team was unique. A lot of times when you lose that job and you're asked to come back and you're not so interested, and it was never a big issue for him. And that just said a ton about what he was able to do. And of course, when he went on to Oklahoma and continued that was huge. But that last year at Alabama, what he did for them under those circumstances is something that always stuck out with us, because Dan, as you know, there's tangible qualities that we all look for in whatever position it is. But that intangible, that player that gives up his goals for his team's good, man, that sticks with me, because I know in a given situation, when it's a really tough time, that player is going to make a play for his team and not for himself. And you can never underestimate that.
So you're a fan of Jalen Hurts?
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what, I know that you have a rule back in the day that you will not come on at all during the season because you never want to get in the way of your head football coach. Well, now you got kind of a Bruce Arians title here. I asked Bruce, I go, what's your new title? He goes, I don't know. They're going to put a name tag on the thing, and I'll find out eventually what it means. I really don't know what it means right now. You got to come on during the season, at least, and talk some ball. We'll leave the Steelers to the side there, but Kev, my friendship with you goes 30 years, and I'm so thankful and appreciative of what you guys did. And I can't thank you enough. And the job you did in Pittsburgh is the gold standard. And I thank you so much, my friend. God bless.
All right, Dan, you take care now.
You got it. Kevin Colbert, the general manager of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So what did we learn here? Excuse me. Chris, are you still here? So Andy Weidl was recommended by Kevin Colbert. King of content. Morgan & Morgan, where the fee is free, my friends. Choosing an attorney is one of the most important things that you possibly can do. That's right. Getting fair compensation for you if you're hurt or injured on the job is one of the most important things you can have. And that's what Morgan & Morgan is. For the people, my friends, it's not a slogan. It's who they are. These folks, over the last 30 years, okay, 30 years, they have brought in over $13 billion worth of settlements for their clients with over 800 attorneys in offices in Philadelphia, New York, Florida, all across the country. There is no doubt the biggest law firm in the country where size matters, okay, is Morgan & Morgan. They will not be intimidated when it comes to your family settlement. This is who they are. This is what they do. There's no doubt about this. The call is free, 800-512-1600. That's 800-512-1600. The consultation is free. And when you call Morgan & Morgan, do me a favor, tell them Big Sil sent you.
Many times when people are injured at a place of business, they don't realize they may have a case. The fact is, injuries should not happen. And most of the time when someone is injured, someone is at fault. Maybe the store manager installed a cheap, slippery floor, or there wasn't proper security. After an injury at a hotel, restaurant, store, or any place of business, it's so important to call us. Time matters, size matters. Morgan & Morgan, for the people.com.